And as soon as you hit that, you're actually on the internet. So with that, I think I am going to let you run a stream.
Thank you so much, sir. I'll see you on an unpopular opinion sometime. Hello, everyone. Okay, bear with me a second. I'm so sorry for the lateness and the delay on everything. But it's just been one of those evenings. I've never tried this before, never done this before. Okay, I've never done this before, guys, so sorry if you've just abandoned me. I am a terrible boomer. We had some problems because I've never used this software before.
I think I'm going to let you run a stream.
Thank you so much, sir. I'll see you on an unpopular opinion sometime. Okay, this is going very slowly tonight. I think it may be Sunday night. Hello, everyone. Internet traffic. Okay, bear with me a second. I'm so sorry for the... but we are going to do... Well, we're just going to... Hi, Mad Mercenary. So, this is an experiment. I might run this again sometime. Thank you so much for bearing with me. The experiment here is... can I talk about... what I'm doing with my James Bond series. So I'm now 5 films into analysing them. Now, what I'm doing is not just reviewing them. There's plenty of people on the internet who review Bond films. 3 of my favourites actually. Dutch Bond fan, he's a good one. Calvin Dyson is another good one. And the third one would be Haphazard Stuff. He's really good. I don't think he analyzes each film individually, but he analyzes the eras of each of the actors. So he reviews the films. Calvin and Dutch Bond fan sort of review the individual films, like what they think works in the film, what they doesn't work, and what they enjoy. What I'm trying to do is analyze them because I think James Bond is it's a literary and cinematic phenomenon. There are no films quite like it because it is a cottage industry. Essentially, one family produced the Bond films, and they have developed a house style which makes them unique, even compared with the other great franchises like Star Wars and Marvel. So they're all they are very much tied to the big studio system, whereas the Bond films are supported by studios, the big studios, but they are run by this one production company, and they've been run by this production company since 1961. So that gives it a unique house style, and in such they have a particular way of adapting the Ian Fleming's character and the novels and bringing it to screen. And what's also amazing about the films is that you can watch them in any order, but they do form a thematic whole. You start noticing in one film something, it will get later referenced in another. And what I think the genius of the Bond films is that they never telegraph it in a way that other films do. So Bond films they hardly use flashbacks. There's not the amount of exposition that you get in other movie franchises. Things are very subtle in Bond films, and I'll explain why. So now that I've got a small audience, and thank you so much for sticking through the boomer moments, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how to analyze the Bond films and what I've been looking at, what I've been noticing, and everything else. So let's go back to Dr. No. So Harry Saltzman, Cubby Broccoli secure the rights to the Bond films in 1961, and they go into full production. On the first one, they choose Dr. No because I think it's simple enough to adapt, and it was also the one that was quite recently released in the it was recently published, so they went with that. They couldn't get Casino Royale because the rights to that one book had been sold to a Hollywood producer called Irvin Ratoff, who adapted it for a live TV drama series called Climax. That version is available on DVD. It's worth looking at as a curiosity. It's not great work. Has Peter Lorre as Le Chiffre in it. Everybody else kind of acquits themselves reasonably well, but it's an American Bond. He's called Card Sense Jimmy Bond. So they didn't get the rights to that, Broccoli and Saltzman. So they got the rights to all the other books, but they didn't. They decided not to produce them in the order that they were published, but more in terms of the order of what they thought they could accomplish, given that they were only given $1 million budget for the first one, which was quite modest. United Artists were a little bit stingy at first on the productions. So they thought Dr. No was achievable on the budget. It had the exotic location, and it was recently published, so it was fresh in the public mind. So, what do you think was the most important decision that Broccoli and Saltzman did? That the first decision that they made about producing Dr. No. And some people say casting Sean Connery was the most important. Some people say choosing Terence Young as the director was the most important. No, the most important thing that Broccoli and Saltzman did when they produced the first Bond movie was make it in color. Because this is when they got together in 1961. Black and white was still a thing. And if you have a look at even Hollywood films in the early 60s, so many of them, ones that would go on to achieve a lot of critical, commercial, and even award recognition success, was still in black and white. The Apartment, The Manchurian Candidate, The Birdman of Alcatraz, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. There's all these really top quality films, and Hollywood was still producing high quality black and white films up until 1965. And so the decision could have been taken to make it in black and white. Now, even though you have in Broccoli and Saltzman two transatlantic producers, so Saltzman is a Canadian, Broccoli is an American of Italian descent. But they were working in Britain at the time. Broccoli, in particular, had produced about half a dozen films in Britain in the 1950s, mostly action films, like The Red Beret with Alan Ladd and Hell Below Zero with Alan Ladd. In 1959-60, he did The Trials of Oscar Wilde, starring Peter Finch. That didn't do well at the box office, so he was looking for a new project, but he was still wanted to be based in the UK because he had made a lot of friends and contacts with people in British production, particularly film crews, and he really wanted to use a British film crew for Dr. No. So the British film industry, much like Hollywood, still a lot of high-quality films are being produced in black and white in the early 60s. So the decision could have been taken to make Dr. No in black and white. It would have been cheaper. It would have meant they could have used part of the budgets to make it more spectacular. But no, they thought color would sell James Bond. And this is important because James Bond is a modern hero. And the idea, he was created by Ian Fleming to be cutting edge. It was back in 1952. And everything about Bond should be cutting edge. So the decision to film in color in 1961 was the crucial thing. We might not have had a Bond series that has lasted this long had the first films been made in black and white. It's interesting. There was an attempt to make a Bond film in the late 50s, in about 1958, 1959. This is where the name Kevin McClory first crops up. He was a film professional. He'd been assistant director on The African Queen back in the early 50s, and he'd been knocking around the British film industry. He was going to have a debut feature film released in 1958 called The Boy and the Bridge, and he met Ian Fleming at that time, and together with some people, Boomer, yes, thank you, Chunky. I'm fine, and I'm just going to pause here to say, if anybody's got questions about the Bond films, please ask me questions. I'd welcome them, see if I can answer them. But McClory met with Ian Fleming and brought on board an experienced scriptwriter called Jack Whittingham. And the three of them went away and cobbled up a script, an original James Bond script, not one based on the novels. And it was called something like Longitude 59 Degrees West, something like that. And there was talk about getting Cary Grant as Bond, although Grant felt he was too old for the part, or David Niven. David Niven wasn't sure. He was getting a bit old for the part. And then the name Richard Burton cropped up. He would have been excellent in retrospect, but I doubt he would have committed himself to a 5-picture deal to make James Bond. So they cobbled out a script, and that script became the basis for Thunderball. So the creation of the villain organization Spectre, the plot of stealing 2 nuclear bombs and holding the world to ransom and using the Bahamas location, that was all apparently done at this meeting between the 3 men. Now, who contributed what to the script is open up to debate. It went to the courts. So when The Boy in the Bridge eventually got released, it was a financial flop and people didn't like Kevin McClory's direction in it. So that meant the Longitude 59 Degrees West project just was abandoned. Fleming took the script notes, made them Thunderball. McClory and Whittingham sued Fleming, got part ownership, and that's where that whole rival Bond production thing comes from. So would a Bond film made in 58-59 be in black and white, starring Richard Burton? Probably. But fate took another course. And I think it's a great thing that Broccoli and Saltzman did end up with the rights, because I think they had a pretty unique vision for the series. In line with Fleming's creation, but also putting an individual stamp. They knew they had to make it look cinematic. And in Dr. No, making it a colour production, setting it in Jamaica, and making Bond cutting edge. His suits would be cutting edge. The style would be cutting edge. The attitude to violence and sex would be cutting edge. Now, okay, I'm pausing because my naughty cat wants to get in, so I'm just pausing. And we're back. So, and it's interesting that they bring in Terence Young as the director, because Terence Young had directed The Red Beret and Hell Below Zero for Cubby Broccoli. I found out this week that they were going to ask a top American director, I can't remember his name, but a well-established Hollywood director to be the first one. But apparently that was the studio United Artists' choice. It wasn't Broccoli's choice. Broccoli always wanted Terence Young. And Terence Young, being public school and military service and all that, just could give the Bond films that polish. He had that insider knowledge of what the style and sophistication of the character was, but he could also handle action. And then along comes Connery. I don't think... I mean, I could talk a bit about who was up for the role. Connery's main rivals for the role was Patrick McGoohan. And McGoohan turned it down because he didn't like James Bond's attitude to sex and violence. McGoohan himself is a fascinating character. But he turned it down, and it's not true that Connery was a complete unknown. He had done a few films. He had a 3-picture deal with 20th Century Fox, one of them being Darby O'Gill and the Little People, made in 1959. He hated his contract with 20th Century Fox. He wanted to become a freelancer. And so he chose as his 3rd film to get out of the clause one of the many roles in The Longest Day. And that completed his 3-picture obligation, and he was free to do the Bond films. But he had built up a reputation over the previous 5 years in films like Hell Drivers and On the Fiddle, but also on TV. He had done a lot of TV. In 1960 alone, he had leading roles in Henry IV Part 2 for the BBC, played Hotspur. It's one of the most important parts in that play. And he played Hotspur opposite, I think it was Robert Hardy as as Hal. Yeah, Robert Hardy played Hal. Younger viewers will know him as Cornelius Fudge from the Harry Potter films. And then the BBC adapted Anna Karenina, the Tolstoy novel, for television, and he landed the part of Karenin. So that went out 60, 61. And that's a big prestigious role. And he'd done a TV production, the British TV production of Requiem for a Heavyweight. And on television, Connery's name was known, so he wasn't a complete unknown when he was cast as James Bond. He had been building up his reputation. But when they chose him, of course, a sort of working class Scottish lad, as we all know, but he wasn't a complete uncouth slob. I mean, he'd been doing Shakespeare and Tolstoy recently, so he was an avid reader as well, Connery. Not a lot of people know that, but he's an avid reader, and he read the Bond novels, and he impressed the production crew with his intelligence. He wanted to know where they wanted to head with the character and bring some stuff in of ideas of his own. Ian Fleming was initially resistant to Connery being cast as Bond. He thought he was too rough around the edges, but upon a meeting between the two men, he was won over by Connery. Terence Young was instrumental in choosing the tailor. I mean, this is the thing about the Bond films. It's the product placement. That's why I think it's a great kind of, small C conservative right-wing film series. That's why we should treasure it, because there aren't many of those around. But everything about the Bond films and the Bond novels about the triumph of Western liberal democracies and capitalism. It's pro-capitalism. Although most of Bond villains have been capitalists out of control, billionaires and multimillionaires who have just lost the plot. But for Bond, the kind of reasonable capitalism, reasonable liberalism, product placement. Bond has sampled the finest things in the world, and so he's very much a torchbearer for Western capitalism and liberalism. So I think that's why he's the last film franchise to hold out against the woke brigade. I know what people have been saying about No Time to Die. We shall see. So when it comes time to turning him into a film series, they don't want to use any old Savile Row tailor. They find the guy who's doing the cutting edge men's fashion. So a guy called Anthony Sinclair, who the establishment felt he was a bit of a rebel, that his suits were a bit raffish, because we all know 50s fashion, the jacket's a little bit too big, the trousers are baggy and pleated. Sinclair had a slimline, tailored to the body look, and it just worked so well on Connery. So he needed a gold Rolex watch. Cubby Broccoli just lent the production his own gold Rolex watch for Bond to wear. They made decisions about Bond, like would he wear shirts with buttons or cufflinks, or would they be popper studs? They went with studs in the end because Bond, being a spy, could not be in any outfit that took too long for him to get out of. And that's not for the sex reasons. It's just that if Bond needed to strip down, dive into the water to escape his pursuers, he needed to get a shirt or a jacket off quickly. Don't bother with cufflinks. Popper studs, get the shirt off quickly. That was the thinking that they had. So you had this a character who was the epitome of British style. And what's fascinating about Dr. No as well is that it's a film that takes sex and violence to a new level. Now, we may scoff. We've seen all kinds of depictions of sex and violence on our movie screens and even TV screens since. But back in 1962, the idea that Bond shoots an unarmed opponent in the back, that he can kill someone and then make a bad pun afterwards. This was all very new to an audience, and he's not your classic British movie hero. He's certainly not an American movie hero. I think one of the things that Broccoli and Saltzman found was that they had American showmanship, and they could push the boundaries a bit more using a British film crew, because in Britain we didn't really have anything like the Hays Decency Code, although British films tended to follow the Hays Code because they wanted to get an American release. But by the 60s, the Hays Code is breaking down. By 1967, it's completely gone. But in 62, they can push the boundaries a little bit and not get hauled up on it. So they can have Bond being that ruthless with an opponent. That sound is a cat playing with a ping pong ball. So there was... United Artists were worried about the scene where Bond shoots Professor Dent in the back. And it looked like they were going to censor that scene. And it was kept in the film. And just marked out that he was a new kind of hero. Okay, so I'm going to answer some questions here because I've been rabbiting on. So I've covered sex. No, I haven't covered sex. I covered violence. Right. Camera on. I could always turn the camera off. Yeah, we can try that if that helps. Let's see if that helps in any way. I don't know if it does. I don't know if I've done it. I'm still very new to Streamlabs, so I do ask people's patience on this one. Did the genre, Mighty Balzac asked, did the genre exist before Doctor No? Well, spy films have existed pretty much from before World War One. There's a couple of fantastic silent film series from France where they really are pushing the boundaries of filmmaking in about 1913 to 1915. I think the director's called Louis Feuillade. I think that's it. But he did two film series because they serialized them. You know, you go to the cinema and you'd watch a 20-minute film and then it would end on a cliffhanger. One of them was called, in 1913, called Fantomas, or spelt Fantomas with an F instead of a PH. And that's fantastic. That's about a master criminal of the type that would be familiar in Bond films. Many decades later, but he's a master criminal and he's being pursued by a British police inspector. And they're fantastically made, the Fantomas. There's, I think, 3 Fantomas films, and there's another one called Les Vampires, which is incredible. That's like an out-and-out, again, you've got a villainous organization. It's an out-and-out kind of espionage thing with a villainous organization and an intrepid reporter who goes undercover to try and break up this gang. It stars, I can't remember who stars in Fantomas, but in Les Vampires, it stars this absolutely amazing French actress called Musidora. I couldn't call her beautiful or anything like that, but she's just absolutely captivating on screen. So that it starts there, and then kind of in the 30s, you have an adaptation of The Secret Agent by the Joseph Conrad novel that is adapted. Hitchcock is doing some spy films in that 39 Steps, the whole Richard Hannay thing. Then into the 1940s, you have a lot of spy films. Notorious, another Hitchcock one. But they're not like Bond. There's not the levels of sex and violence. It's always very cat and mouse. The Bond films invent a lot of things. I mean, those opening title sequences. Opening title sequences have become more graphic in the late 50s. So in Hollywood, there was Saul Bass, really a pioneer of the medium of animated opening titles to set the scene. And in the US, but also working a lot in the UK, was Maurice Binder. And he created the vast majority of Bond opening title sequences. So that was a new thing. Shooting somebody in the back was a new thing. And I'll get to Ursula Andress because I think she needs to be mentioned. Okay, Aaron Hook says, I agree that the Bond films about the superiority of Western greatness, absolutely. But aren't the Bond books more about the superiority of the British? Well, yes, no, and I don't think the two are exclusive. I think if you are championing Western greatness, Britain's got to be in there. Britain and America. There is a lot Ian Fleming was very much he was a big admirer of Raymond Chandler as a writer, and he tried to make Bond a British Raymond Chandler. So there's always been an element in the Bond novels of deep personal connections between Britain and America, but also Britain and France as well. less so in the Bond novels, but it's there. Every so often, Bond works sometimes in France, sometimes alongside the Deuxième Bureau with Mathis. Obviously, in the relationship between Bond and Felix Leiter is very close. Fleming liked America a lot, and he set quite a number of novels in America. And he would point out the differences between Americans and British. Obviously, he was always very pro-British in the novels, and he would point out failings in American culture and society. But at the same time, Fleming could point out a lot of faults in British culture. He kind of hated British pettiness, and you can see that every time Bond has to deal with a petty official who gets hung up about talking about the weather, gardening, or would you like a cup of tea, Bond's kind of winces inside without ever showing what he truly feels. So he hates that kind of small-minded Little Englander mentality, Bond. So yeah, I think he sees the relationship between Britain and America, Ian Fleming, as very close, but Britain being the smarter one of the two, pointing the Americans and their resources where they should go. And I'm just going to make a kind of lighting adjustment. Right, I also had to check the connection, the battery connection on the computer. So, yes, my bandwidth apparently is cutting out. I think it's Sunday evening. Everybody's on. As someone who's only seen a couple of Bond films, this Mad Mercenary says, as someone who has only seen a couple of Bond films, do the different Bonds know about each other, or is it just a reboot every director? Some people. No, it's the same character. Okay, I should address this theory. Okay. Right. So there's this theory that cropped up a few years ago that each Bond actor is a different Bond. So James Bond is the code name, right? So Bonds could be called John Smith or Deke Smeagely, and they get recruited to MI6. They become a 00, and they're given the name James Bond as well as 007. And this is patently untrue. It's the same character. Each actor is playing the same character, the same James Bond. A guy who got chucked out of Eton as a boy, joined the Royal Navy, joined MI6, and then got married to Tracy Bond. She dies. It's if you watch Bond films, they reference each other. The new ones reference the old ones. It's the same character. And I'll if I've got time, looks like this is going to be the first of a perhaps 2 or 3 part one. But I'll explain how the films relate to each other. And this is another thing that's unique about Bond, is that it's the same character, but he can't obviously have started his spying career in 1962 and still be going to the present day. So time is irrelevant in the Bond films. It's almost unique that everybody looks for continuity, and there's nitpickers, and you will not find actual physical continuity in the Bond films, particularly if you're looking at timelines. I don't even think the Bond films, if you watch them in chronological order, that's not the way the saga unfolds. Because I can make a case that Octopussy is Bond's last case, if I ever get that far. But yes, you're supposed to. You can watch them in any order, for the most part. They are all part of the same saga. They're not necessarily in the right order, and the time frame is just out of the window. Right. Is this live or is it Memorex? I wish I knew, Bill. Right. Yeah, apologies. I'm using very primitive equipment. I've not done a live stream before. I'm just making this up as I go along. This is hopefully the start of something a bit more. So let's talk about Ursula Andress and sex. So she's a new type of Bond girl. She does not fit the archetype of a 1950s leading lady. Her physique is all wrong. So if we just conjure up in your mind what a 1950s film star looks like, let's pull a name out of the hat here, Kim Novak. So if you can picture Kim Novak, and if you don't know who Kim Novak is, just do a quick Google search for her. That is your archetypal 50s leading lady. And she's got the hourglass figure, and everything's in correct proportion, and the hair is welded into place. But with Ursula Andress, it changes all that. They give her a very natural hairstyle. She comes out the water. Her hair's wet for most of the film, so it's down, it's straight, it's not coiffured or styled. She's got shoulders out to goodness knows where, so she's broad shoulders. She's built like an Amazon. She's not built like a typical 50s film star. Her face, facially, the 50s film star looks a little bit more round face, pert nose, big thick lips. Ursula Andress breaks that. She's chiseled cheekbones, long straight nose, kind of smaller eyes. You know, she is transitioning into. Well, no, she's not transitioning, but her role is transitioning the changing the definition of the leading lady into the 1960s. And she's very physical. She's physique. You can actually imagine her being a pearl diver in Jamaica or whatever. You know, she's a snorkeler in Jamaica, living a very outdoors, almost feral lifestyle. So Bond also, how many times did he have sex in Doctor No? He has sex 3 times in Doctor No, and that's a record for a main character in a film of that era. He sleeps with the Eurasian girl, the second one, Miss Taro. So already he doesn't care about race in all this. That, you know, taboos are being broken all across the way in Doctor No. And I said it's amazing that it made it onto American screens, but I think the culture it was ready for this. It was ready for the ultimate capitalist Western liberal hero, and you know there's kind of the stiff kind of leading man of the 1950s. Certainly in the British sense, Bond is not Kenneth More or Richard Todd or any of these kind of Michael Wilding kind of British leading man of the 1950s, nor is he kind of like the Robert Ryan, Richard Widmark, Gregory Peck type of hero in America. It's kind of flippant attitude, casual relationship with sex, gambling, drinking. It's all very different now. Okay, let's just catching up. You're doing fine, but unless you can kick the kids off the internet, maybe don't. Camera going forward. I feel your pain. Okay, well, next time I set one up, I don't know if I can stop the camera on this stream without sort of taking a big pause and concentrating on that. So the next stream will just be photos, you know, and just my voice. I'll be just a voice. Okay, that's probably for the best anyway. Kim Novak's plastic surgery did not go well, lol. I've got to look that up. For me, Kim Novak's career kind of dies in 1958. So, Bill Whitaker. Ursula Andress has a build like Bo Derek. Interesting, they were both married to John Derek. I find that interesting. He has a type. John Derek had a type of woman and Linda Evans as well. You know, those are 3. So all blonde, all big, broad-shouldered, all statuesque, all kind of Amazonian. Although Linda Evans looks Amazonian, but as soon as she starts opening her mouth and acting, she's kind of all fluffy, fluffy and home-baked cookies and all that kind of thing. But yeah, Ursula Andress, Bro Derek. It's a John Derek thing, isn't it? Could we have some Bond girl photos, please? What I might do is do a slideshow. For the next one, I'll do a slideshow of things. And so I can do that. But this is the experimental one, guys. This is just an intro. So Doctor No became a hit on release. Not box office smash, but definitely a hit. Definitely, okay, people want this character. They're ready for him. Doctor No's released in October 1962. And what was happening at that time? Love Me Do by the Beatles was released in the same month. Wally Schirra on Sigma 7 went into space on the Mercury astronauts. And the Cuban Missile Crisis happened. And everything is poised. Goodbye 1950s. This is where the 60s begin in the autumn of 1962. This is where the 60s really begin. And it's interesting that at the time that you have Wally Schirra and Sigma 7 being launched into space and the Cuban Missile Crisis, the plot of Doctor No is about a villainous organization trying to radar jam American missiles and interfere with the US missile program. So it's very topical as well. I should mention Doctor No's base, because this is a pointer to the future. There's a Ken Adams set with the nuclear reactor and all personnel to decontamination center and all this stuff. It's just absolutely cutting edge. Nothing in film seen before, nothing like it. And it establishes the template. So, Bill Whitaker, Honor Blackman, Diana Rigg, and Joanna Lumley were all Avengers and Bond girls. This is true, and there's a missing name there. That's Linda Thorson, and she was apparently not happy that she was never considered for a Bond film. But what part? But yes, but Joanna Lumley's she's a minor Bond girl. So yeah. And the Profumo Affair and Kim Philby's defection to the USSR also took place at that time. Yes, that's an interesting point from Aaron Hook there. I'm not sure exactly what month the Profumo Affair happened, but it was certainly around that at that time. There was also Philby was the Cambridge Spy Circus. I think there was 5 of them. Philby, Burgess, McLean, Blake, and Blunt. McLean and Burgess had defected to the Soviet Union in about 1951. And one of the reasons why Ian Fleming wrote James Bond was that he felt that the press were up in arms when Burgess and McLean defected to Russia. The press was up in arms that these 2 British Secret Service agents had defected to with loads of secrets. And of course, during the Attlee government, British security was very weak because Britain had developed very advanced jet engines. I think the Nene engine that was developed for the de Havilland Vampire, I think it was. Anyway, they just gave it, just gave it to the Soviet Union, and that they used a copy. They copied it, reverse engineered it, copied it, put it in the MiG-15. MiG-15, highly successful jet fighter of the 1950s, caused the United Nations forces hell in the Korean War. So Fleming was absolutely, being formerly of the Secret Service himself, Ian Fleming, he was disgusted by the defections, and he felt that what was needed was a redressing of the balance, a British spy that was loyally British, and that's where the germs of the idea of the James Bond series began, as a kind of hit back at these defections and at what the Soviet Union were doing. So there's a lot in Casino Royale about how Bond comes to hate SMERSH, the Soviet Union Assassination Bureau. So yes, that's interesting about the Philby, Burgess and McLean. Philby in May 1963 and Porfirio in June 1963. So at the time of Doctor No, those scandals hadn't quite broken yet, okay? But we were on the cusp of it. interesting. So, shall we move on to From Russia with Love while we've still got time? So, Doctor No's a big enough hit that immediately they want to go into making the second film, From Russia with Love. Again, the reason why that book was chosen was that after the first James Bond film was released, President John F. Kennedy gave an interview, and in that interview he said that one of his top 5 favorite books was From Russia with Love by Ian Fleming. So they said, the president likes this. Okay, let's make a film of the book the president likes. And also, it was achievable. They were given a bit more of a budget from United Artists were very generous, gave them a slightly bigger budget, and so they went into production on that. They felt From Russia with Love was achievable. Now, a lot of Bond snobs and purists think this is the best James Bond film of them all. I disagree. I think it's a great film. I think it absolutely establishes Bond. Whereas there's a few ropey bits around Doctor No, back projection screen, and the car chases. The action's not quite there. The soundtrack's not quite there. But on From Russia with Love, it's the first film that gets the Bond ingredients right. The Bond template, that's a Bond film, as we will come to know it. And a lot of times people want a Bond film like From Russia with Love again. Maybe we'll get it with No Time to Die. But every so often, people want, no, I want a serious Bond film where he's actually doing spying. And, For Your Eyes Only does that to an extent. Tomorrow Never Dies, a little bit. But definitely, Living Daylights, I think, owes a lot to From Russia with Love. But From Russia with Love has the spy thing. He's got to go in to Turkey, which is kind of almost like a neutral zone between the West and the communist bloc. And he's got to go in to steal this Lecter decoding device off the Russians. But even then, the novel has the Russians firmly as the enemy. But I think Broccoli and Saltzman realized that, with a film series, that the geopolitics of the world could change so much that the Russians might not seem, in a few years down the line, they might not seem like the villains anymore to the same extent. So they really wanted to push the idea of a villain organization, an international villain organization, not tied to any one country. And I think that worked out well in the long run. Certainly, Fleming in the novels moved away from real-life geopolitics and into this kind of shadowy non-governmental villain organizations that operate all over the world. And I think that's paid off in the long run, because I think that's now villain organizations are these philanthropists. I mean, if George Soros isn't a Bond villain, I don't know in real life. I don't know who is. Roy Herbert says Cambridge University hasn't changed much, and still a bunch of communists. Yeah, the more things change, the more things stay the same. Bill Whittaker says Goldfinger was the first real Bond film. Credits and gadgets. Yeah, hold that thought. I kind of agree, but I think From Russia with Love really has the ingredients there. What's missing from Russia with Love that Goldfinger puts in is the outlandishness, and that's the final ingredient. That's the final thing. But he says the credits. Well, the credits of From Russia with Love and Goldfinger were done by the same person, not Morris Binder, but Robert Brownjohn. Okay. So From Russia with Love has this kind of cat and mouse spying thing, and it greatly improves on Doctor No in terms of the set pieces. I mean, think of From Russia with Love. It has the gypsy fight and the gun battle that follows two gypsy women trying to claw each other to death. Who else? That's an aside. When I was at primary school, I went to school with Martine Beswick's son. There you go. I like name dropping every so often. But what's interesting is that it has the big set pieces. Even the boat chase at the end, Bond sort of running across the moors, being buzzed by a helicopter, and then I've got to mention the train fight between Bond and Red Grant, played by Robert Shaw. This is two brick shithouses of men trying to kill each other in a confined space. It's brilliant. It's one of the best fight scenes ever staged because Connery and Shaw just give it everything. You really believe it. That's the birth of cinematic ultraviolence. I think there's two films that just say, it's not sort of put them up fisticuffs at dawn kind of thing. And that's from Russia with Love. Sort of brings the first absolute no holds barred fist fight, and then Point Blank with Lee Marvin kind of That is so violent, that film. Lee Marvin dick punches someone in a 1967 film. It's just great. Anyway, right. Bill Whittaker says, I imagine Soros drowning kittens rather than stroking pussies. What he does in his personal life. Anyway, what else? So, From Russia with Love gets the ingredients right, but Daniela Bianchi is not. It's not really the A-grade Bond girl. She does okay. She looks the part, but she was a model, not an actress, and I think it shows. Also, it lacks a central villain to focus on. And yes, you do have an unseen Blofeld, those referred to as number one. You have Rosa Klebb, played by Lotte Lenya, absolutely fantastic in every scene she's in, but she's not in it enough. Vladek Sheybal as well. You've got these great actors like Vladek Sheybal and Lotte Lenya, and they're just not used effectively enough. We don't see enough of them on screen. So it kind of bonds up against a committee, and it's a committee that he doesn't know about. He never meets Kronstein. He never meets Blofeld in the film. He only encounters Klebb right at the end. And Grant's true identity is not known for much of it. So he's up against a committee, and this will happen again in The Living Daylights, where we don't have a single villain to hate or to focus our and the viewer's attention on and Bond's attention on. We have a committee, and I think that just kind of lessens the impact. I would much rather it that we had Lotte Lenya as an out-and-out Bond villain. She's in charge. She's in control. And there's a more climactic confrontation between her and Bond at the end. But, oh well, what can you do? But certainly, From Russia with Love is a big leap forward. And, it was a big success on release, although not top 10, not a blockbuster. But certainly a big success. And then we get the blockbuster, the one. Goldfinger, the greatest Bond film of them all, where everything finally is in place, because now Bond's going to get the iconic Aston Martin with all the gadgets, and the relationship between him and Q is properly established. It's not Q is admiring of Bond, giving him, here's this lovely gadget, 007, oh, do good luck with it. No, it's like, treat it properly, Bond. I don't joke about my work, and absolutely nails the part. Desmond Llewellyn nails the part. Gert Frober is the definitive Bond villain. We have the henchman now with Odd Job. That sense of outlandishness comes in. And I could talk for a long time on Goldfinger and what makes it work, but I'm going to leave it there for now. This is just a test stream, just to see if everything works. And next time, I'll take your comments on board. No webcam. We don't need that. Second of all, I'll have a slideshow of different images, so perhaps tailored for each film that we talk about. Please do gather up your questions. Thank you so much for being patient while I was receiving tech help from Don the Pleb. Thank you, Don, for all that. This is just a test. So I'll learn the software better, learn how to handle things better, and I thank you so much for your patience, for your questions. do spread the word. If you know any Bond fans who'd be interested in this, I don't just want to review the Bond films. I want to find out what makes them tick and what makes them special and how they all relate, and also talk about the issues that were going on in the world at the time the Bond films were made. So I'll just cover some last questions. Bill, what do you get? I think AA just stole all your viewers. Yeah. AA, why do you do this to me, man? You know, I'm good for you. I'm good to you, man. I'm good to you. You know, send some of that love back to me, eh? Okay, Father Boris, helpful review. Favorite Bond moment. What is it? Favorite Bond moment is that circular saw weapon in Octopussy. Haha. Yeah, I know the guy who was in that film. He was one of the two Indian assassins. He's also appears in The Living Daylights. There's an actor called Sumar Khan. I once worked with him. Yeah, funny guy. Yeah, that's a good moment. I like the octopus sort of stuck to that guy's face. Aaron Hook says, I think there's a difference between Doctor No and the rest of the films. Doctor No is still very much book Bond. To an extent, a lot of them are book Bond. But I see what you mean. While starting with From Russia with Love, we see cinematic Bond. I would say From Russia with Love is both. It sticks very closely to the book. Thunderbolts sticks pretty closely to the book as well. We see cinematic Bond. Yes, it was always going to happen because you had to visually recreate the films on screen. And there was always going to be a bit of cinematic license. I think Fleming had input on the first three, and then he died. There is... I don't like putting such a hard distinction between book Bond and cinematic Bond. I think the character endures. What I found fascinating about Skyfall is just how much tiny bits of book Bond got into the film. So certainly not in terms of following the plot that they're the same, but certainly in terms of trying to keep the character rooted in the books. I think it's there. I think the character is still rooted in the books. He quips more puns than in the books. But that was something that Noel Coward is Ian Fleming's next door neighbour in Jamaica. And they were good friends. And Coward said, you got to like Bond up a bit, put some jokes in. And I think Fleming was starting to develop a wry sense of humour in the later Bond novels because of that. Anyway, I'm going to end the stream. Thank you so much for patience. I'll work on the technology. I'll let everybody know when I'm doing the next one. And yeah, you go and sod off to AA's stream, whatever he's doing. And evening all. See you later.